So what we'll do is, before we go any further, we're going to actually introduce ourselves. So I'm Rory. I'm the founder and CEO, one of the founders and CEO here at Gravitee. Nicolas, David, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nicolas Geraud, one also of the co-founder of Gravitee and Chief Customer Officer.
And finally, David, another co-founder and the CTO at Gravitee.
Great. So it's a pleasure for us to be able to speak with everyone today about a really exciting and interesting subject for us here at Gravitee. And we're really interested to learn from all of you just as much as hopefully you'll be able to learn from us. So in terms of what we'll be covering today, we will start with me talking a little bit about the API management market, about what we're seeing in the market, about what we believe the next generation is and events, and about how we manage synchronous with asynchronous communications and everything along those lines. I'll start there. Then Nicolas will jump in and talk a little bit about a couple of examples where we see this working with customers. Then we will jump to a bit of a poll. So we're really interested to get everybody interacting and sort of talking, getting some indications about how you all see the world through both an event streaming and sync lens and an async lens and stuff like that. David will then take over and wow you all with our roadmap and do a quick demo for some of the stuff that we've just introduced in the platform, and we'll then pause at that point for a few questions. Okay, so without further ado, what I'll do is I will start, and we'll start talking about the event native API management and the API management market as a whole. So what I want to really do here with everybody is take you on a bit of a journey, essentially, as to how we see things at the moment through the lens of a lot of our customers and the challenges that they have, and some of the themes that we see starting to emerge. So if we go back, I know we all lived in a simpler time, as we put it here on this slide. If you go back, let's say, I don't know, 15, maybe actually longer than that, we're not in 2015 anymore. Let's say the beginning of the 2000s, so 20 odd years ago. What we found is that companies were primarily doing things synchronously, right? They were sending requests, they would get a response back. And primarily this was through REST and SOAP. They obviously still completely valid today, and REST used a bit more than SOAP, but nonetheless, they still serve a purpose. And the challenge that we found businesses faced in the early 2000s was quite a fundamental one. They saw this wave, let's say, this oncoming principle or theme coming called the cloud. And it was starting to become more prevalent. And people were saying, well, that sounds great. Maybe I don't have to host everything myself. I like this ability to be able to pick and choose like where I put it in the sort of hybrid architecture and all things like this. That's fantastic. And what people did, what the sort of early adopters in the API management space did, was they created these platforms that enabled an abstraction on top of this complex architecture that enabled people to be able to move towards utilization of the cloud. And the sorts of the business pains that people felt at that particular point in time predominantly were solved through REST and SOAP. Now, what has changed, I would say, in the 20 years is that the data consumers' demands are to have more data, more accurate, and more real time. That's fundamentally the shift that we are seeing at this particular point in time. And what we notice is that in that context of moving to this more real-time world is that a lot of the principles that were built for the first generation of API management, which was primarily focused on synchronous technologies, struggle a little bit. They struggle a little bit. A lot of the things that you would expect through the API lifecycle of being able to secure, of being able to expose, of being able to, consume and discover, and all the different things that you would expect it in an API lifecycle becomes a bit more challenging fundamentally in this asynchronous world. And that's what we see. That's what this visual here is ultimately trying to represent, is that in this world where you've got multiple different technologies operating at different velocities, how do you apply the same consistent approach of building, managing, monitoring, securing, exposing, consuming? How do you fundamentally do that? And that's the fundamental challenge that we find a lot of our customers face today, is as their consumers are wanting to move towards this more real-time data. Their consumers are wanting to be able to have more data, more accurate and more up-to-date fundamentally. They struggle with this ability to be able to say, hang on a sec, we invented a wheel over here, but we now have to potentially go and reinvent the wheel over here. And that's the challenges that we fundamentally see people facing today. And what we've noticed is that this is only getting worse. There's a very small percentage of people who really know how to truly address this particular problem. And it's in a market, a phenomenally massive market in the API world. And so we are seeing that it's this sort of oncoming wave, a bit like with the cloud, but with this move to event-driven architectures. How do people solve the pains that they have now, I should say, with this move to real time and stuff of that nature, alongside their more synchronous request response architectures? And fundamentally, that is what Gravitee is here to address. What you now have with Gravitee, and the simplest way that I can characterize this is to say that all of the API lifecycle and expectations you had of the full lifecycle API management in a restful world, with Gravitee, you can effectively now apply that in a single platform to all of your different velocities of data. So within the platform now, we have connectors to things like MQTT, Kafka, RabbitMQ, whatever it may be. You have the ability now within our platform to be able to simply just connect to these different data sources and treat them as if they were your traditional REST APIs effectively. And one of the most beautiful things about the platform is you have all that consistent layer in the middle, as you can see, whether it's API security, productization, monitoring, all these sorts of things. So one consistent way now to be able to build, manage, monitor, secure, expose, and consume all your data services, regardless of the velocity. And that is a key differentiator from a Gravitee perspective. So look, I don't want to bore you too much with anything more, or talk to you too much further, because I'm sure you're very interested to see stuff from David about more detail about where we're going, and hearing from Nicolas about customer case studies and things of that nature. But this is what I did want to speak to you about, is to really show you from our perspective the pains that we are seeing people have in this world at the moment, when they've got data moving at different velocities, and they fundamentally have these challenges where they're thinking, hang on a sec, I've got all this stuff built over here and people were able to discover my APIs, but how now do I enable them to discover my asynchronous services or my streaming services? How do you do that in the same way? How do you provide the consistency, the governance, the control, all these sorts of things? And that is fundamentally what Gravitee now has the ability to address. Okay, so that's enough from me. What I'll do is I will pass over to Nicolas, who will talk to you a little more about some of our customers. Nicolas, over to you.
Thank you, Rory. So yeah, as we talk about the standardization and the security in the synchronous and asynchronous world, this is what we call the API 3.0 wave. So this wave of new usage, let's say. And I would like to illustrate this concept with two real use cases. So yeah, the first one is a company that controls water and gas pipelines. And how do they do that? Sorry, they do that with a lot of different IoT devices like sensors and like valves to control the pipeline. The pipeline is for end users, let's say, like you and me, not just for companies. So they manage that, and the technology behind those services use a very different and very different protocols, like REST, of course, but also Kafka and MQTT. MQTT is very well known in the IoT world. And the question was how to manage all those services, how to secure both north-south traffic and also east-west traffic, and how to deliver the unified experience to customer regardless the technology that is used. And this is the purpose of every single new features, let's say, in the vision of the platform in Gravitee. It's how to have this unified experience. So this is one of the key things that has made us successful, let's say, in this with this customer, is to have the ability to provide this unified experience for their customers and to allow them to secure the access, regardless if it's a classic REST API or if it's a Kafka topic. For those of you who already know Gravitee, you know the plans, the subscription. So this experience when you discover REST API and how to read the documentation and subscribe to this service. So we were able, let's say, to demonstrate the capacity of the platform to do that with regardless of the technology that is used in the backend. And it's also very important for them to allow and to provide some services on top of those new technology, new event technology in the backend, and to have that next to the classic, let's say, REST services and business critical applications. Next slide, please, Rory. The other one is another completely different kind of customer. This is a sport league, and the you know, in sports, everyone likes data and statistics, and they have this project. They had this project, sorry, to put chips in the jersey of all players, and with those sensors again, they will be able to have a lot of new data. How, and of course, as everyone as every single companies, even if in sport and perhaps more in sport than in other business, how to monetize all those data, because everyone loves statistics and loves to bet on some stuff during games. So how to do that? So the idea to provide more or less two kinds of information on two kinds of streams. Sorry, one dedicated for media, okay, which are less, let's say, real time, and others for gambling houses, more real data. And of course, there's a monetization use cases behind that, not just the technology use case. And they also wanted to have consumer experience with a developer portal where you can subscribe again and you can discover all those new services and you can monetize this experience to have access to those stream of data. And this was again the purpose and the where, let's say, the Gravitee visions fits the real market, let's say, real new use cases in the industry. How to secure, how to control, how to put, like if you know API management, I suppose so all of you already know the API management, how to have rate limiting based on messages, not just based on requests. Okay, so it's the kind of same use cases that you can have in mind for your real API, sorry, for your REST API, but what you want to apply on events and stream services. Okay. And this was again the where Gravitee has won, let's say, on this new vision and how to do a protocol mediation between those backends with new technology, with new kind of paradigm, let's say, and how to provide that to everyone in the world who wants to consume those data and be able to make business with those information. So this was two main, let's say, and real and concrete, let's say, use cases where a company has a lot of information and use cases where the technology is definitely asynchronous. But from a business perspective, they needed to have the same experience that the ones that you want to provide currently and that you provide currently with your REST, classic REST API in the HTTP world. That's all for me. I give you the mic again, Rory.
Perfect. Yeah. So really interesting there from Nicolas. And Nicolas, thanks so much for doing that. really talking to some of the points that I made a little earlier about the challenges that we're seeing customers and prospective customers face when they've got existing synchronous services and they're saying, hang on a sec, we've now got asynchronous, and how do we provide that one consistent way to build, manage, monitor, secure, expose, and consume? Again, how do you apply the API lifecycle to not only your REST APIs, but also to your asynchronous services, whether that be Kafka, RabbitMQ, Solace, whatever that may be. So what we want to do at this particular point is actually, we're going to, I think all of you should have a little pop-up, maybe it's on the right, maybe it's at the bottom, and you will be able to answer some questions specifically in relation to this. It'll be really helpful from our perspective to learn more from yourselves as well as to where you are really finding particular challenges in this regard, whether it's about internally exposing these services to people internally or externally or both or whatever it may be. So we really appreciate your engagement and involvement in this. What we've also got for you in return is an offer, and we'll also put this up at the end, and I believe there may be a little banner at the bottom, which is basically some free architecture deep dives from our perspective. So if, for example, you've got challenges and you've got pains, whether it be about MQTT, whether it be about, you know, how you've got REST APIs and you want to be able to do X, Y, and Z, there's no commitment from our perspective. It's just, there's no commitment from your perspective, I should say, in that we would love to learn from you, work with you, partner with you to help you on that journey as well. And so from our perspective, it's a completely free, you know, no commitment from your perspective, and just sign up for this link here where it says landing.gravitee.io/consultation. And that will be people in David's team who will take an active interest and actively work with you on all these sorts of things. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing some of your inputs on the poll, and also looking forward to speaking to some of you at these consultations. So without further ado, we're going to hand over to David, and David's going to wow us all now with the roadmap and what's coming up, what we've just recently developed, what's coming up, and what we're going to do in the future as well. And then he'll do a bit of a demo. He'll actually give you a live hands-on demo of what we're doing in Gravitee and how it works, and practical applications associated with some of this unification between sync and async. So without further ado, David, it's over to you, my friend.
Yes, thank you, Rory. Can you leave it me so that I can share my screen, please?
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Just
all yours.
Okay, let me know if you can see my screen well.
We can see your screen. You may just want to maximize it.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. All good.
Should be better now. Okay, cool. So let's jump on the let's say the most exciting part of the webinar. Sorry, guys. But so let's go through the roadmap. So basically, what I've done at Gravitee from a product strategy perspective is to cover three different categories. The first one is obviously the one about the event native API management. So that's where we're looking at having this Gravitee, whatever the kind of components, if it's the gateway, if it's the portal of the console, components which you know from the Gravitee architecture. That's where we will try to, and not try, we will unify and reconciliate all your sync APIs and async APIs within the same platform. But the first part with the different connectors, which we'll go through in the next slides. The second one is about the deployment experience. So you know that there are plenty of different ways to deploy your platform, whatever it's in Docker, in Kubernetes, maybe in legacy virtual machines, and so on. And we make our best effort to ensure that all the way you want to deploy Gravitee will fit with your own infrastructure. We don't want only Gravitee to be easy to use, but we want it to be easy to deploy whatever the kind of architecture, north, south, east, west kind of things. That's where we would like to push Gravitee. And obviously, the security is kind of key topic with all the governance aspects, all the lineage aspects, etc., etc. So that's one of the part and one of the category which we want to cover with thinking about how we could drive API security, or we could ensure the same level of and the same standard of security, whatever it's an async or async API. Obviously, that's not just a promise all we are telling to you today. That's already part of the platform. So basically, the latest release of Gravitee, which is the 3.20 version of Gravitee, which has been released the last month then in January, is already providing all the things which we are looking at talking to you today, and also all the things which I will demo to you in the next few minutes. So basically, if you know a bit of Gravitee, all the APIs are driven or defined using what we are calling a Gravitee API definition. And so as part of this even native introduction to a product, we have improved and we have extended our API definition so we can make sure that we can fit and we can support all the different ways to consume your API. Again, whatever it's a sync API with classical proxy kind of things, or if it's about async with kind of heterogeneous backend, Kafka, MQTT, Solace, GMS, maybe, etc., etc. So for sure, as I stated, we are providing some connectors right now, such as Kafka, such as MQTT, such as others. Some of part of the community edition, some others are part of our enterprise offer, where we are providing some more, let's say, advanced capabilities around the quality of service, making sure that we are ensuring that we are delivering the messages, that messages are not lost, etc., etc. We are providing some extended policies. So if you know about policies in the context of Gravitee, that's basically kind of atomic action, which we will apply to the request response. But when we are within this async world, that's no more request or response kind of paradigm. That's more things which we will apply to some what we are calling events, or let's say messages. So you will be able to play with such policies on the messages from an async perspective. Then what we introduced in the 3.20 release was also all the things around the deployment experience. What we released recently is what we are calling the Gravitee Kubernetes operator. So that's a new component which you guys can deploy into your kube cluster. And so you can manage, let's say, from following a GitOps manner or an infrastructure as code manner, the definition of your API. So you no longer have to click from the UI, or you no longer have to make some calls to the REST API. You can manage everything from your Gravitee Kube operator. So all this is already available. So if you guys are jumping, or if you guys are upgrading to the 3.20 version of Gravitee, that's all things which are possible right now. Okay, so that was the focus of what we are providing as of today. So basically, we introduced the API definition. I will give you an overview of that one in a few minutes during the demo session. We are providing what we're calling now message level policies, which are no more things applied to the request payload or the body or the response payload, but things which you can apply to the message / the events from an async perspective, and the quality of service, just to ensure that we can guarantee that all the messages are at least on that kind of rules delivered to your consumers. The first connectors which we are coming with are Kafka, MQTT, and Solace. And so the endpoint connector are finally, let's say, where the gateway will connect to, so the backend services. And then from an entry point connector, that's how the consumer would connect to the gateway. So let's say that some of them would be interested at establishing a kind of WebSocket connection to the gateway, and we would process the messages, and maybe we will forward them to a Kafka broker. Or they are maybe interested with what we are calling the service sent event, which is another specification on top of the HTTP specification. Or maybe you want to change the paradigm, and so that would be no more for the consumer to invoke and to call or to establish a long connection to the gateway, and you will prefer to let the gateway poll you or to push you the different updates from Kafka, from MQTT directly to something which you are exposing to our API gateway. So that's basically a webhook. What's coming next from an event native? So all the things which we have shared with you today are available, but for sure there are a few things which will come in the rest of the year. The first thing is something which I will show you in the next slide. It's a completely revamped UI and UX. For now, we can manage the event native or async API using some Postman connections by calling the REST API and do some calls to the gateway. So we thought about making things a bit more easier from the UI and UX perspective. So we make sure that it's pretty easy for the people to create a new API, a new async API by choosing all they want to see the consumers to consume the gateway, which kind of technologies or which kind of messaging service they want to connect to, etc., etc. For those who know about Gravitee, we have what we are calling our policy studio. So for now, the studio was available for you to define and associate some policies to the request and response kind of request. With this new policy studio, you will be able to associate the new messaging policies, let's say, to your flows. We will introduce some new policies, the cloud event one, and you will have a demo of that one in the next minutes. And others. From an endpoint connector perspective, so we have already 3 different connectors. We're looking at extended the collection of connectors as per the marketplace. So we'll have the GMS, some HEWS technologies such as SQS, SNS, Kinesis as well. There are plenty of them, RabbitMQ, AMQP, Edge Event Hub. There are many different policies, many different messaging systems and services available as per the market. So we'll make sure that because we have a platform which is really extendable with a system of plugin, etc., really modulable, we'll make sure that we are covering most of the needs here. One of the things which is really asked by customers, by users, by the community users is all the thing around the schema registry, because, okay, that's good, you're doing some Kafka kind of things with the gateway, but sometimes what has been pushed by the consumers isn't necessarily what I'm looking for from a specification, from a protocol, from a format perspective within my Kafka. So I would like to associate or to plug my Kafka connection to a schema registry. So I make sure that the format is the one which is expected. So that's coming on the next version of Gravitee. And later, from an event native perspective, there are many things, many crazy things which we would like to introduce, such as the Discovery Center, another designer where you could manage your async API using a kind of mind map. We are looking at covering the TCP and MTLS plans, for sure, adding some GraphQL policies. There are plenty of different ways which we would like to introduce as part of the Gravitee roadmap. And now, if you're focusing on what we're calling the deployment experience, so we are already providing what we're calling the Gravitee Kubernetes operator. So that's already available. You can just run a kind of Helm install, and that will be fully usable within your the Kubernetes cluster, sorry. So you will find all the resources needed on the docs.gravitee.io. What we are looking at introduce in the next months is, as part of the next release of Gravitee, is the Kubernetes ingress controller. So making our API gateway to react to the ingresses which you are defining as part of your Kubernetes cluster, looking at applying some kind of templating, looking at applying some policies, some security things to your APIs, but under the scope of the Kubernetes ingress controller. The DBLS mode, it's still okay, your side, yes? I can see something on my side telling that currently the connection is not stable. All good?
Yeah, I think you're okay. I think
okay.
There's a couple
Perfect.
of places where it's been a bit up and down, but generally speaking, it's all good.
Okay, perfect. So the DBS mode, or let's say the headless mode, so making sure that the API gateway can run without Elasticsearch, can run without MongoDB or DocumentDB or Postgres, any kind of database. So we'll have a kind of stateless gateway, which you can drive in different ways using the kube operator, using maybe some Git repositories where you could push your metrics, your analytics to a Datadog, etc., etc. And finally, later in the year, covering the gateway API specifications, which is a kind of ingress controller V2, let's say. So that's the kind of things which we like to cover from a deployment perspective this year at Gravitee. I told you about a revamped UI UX for Event Native. So you can see here some of the screens which we are looking at introducing as part of the next version of Gravitee to ease the creation of your async API without asking yourself too many questions. You know what is expected from your consumers, you know what to consume. So that will be kind of click on different places from the wizards, and we'll do all the rest just for you. Demo time, cool. 3 different parts from a demo. The first one will be, at least for me, to give you a kind of overview of the different Gravitee IO components for who are not fluent with Gravitee yet. So you'll see the different UIs, the gateway, the console, and the portal. Then what we'll do is to create an async API, and I'll show you how this one is rendered from the developer portal. And then the most crazy part, I would say, is I will get you through the different Postman collection, so we can create concrete async API and rely on Kafka and apply some different entry points, different policies, etc., with webhooks. It will be quite crazy, I would say. So
just one thing, actually, David. There's a couple of questions about different technologies, and that's okay. You can carry on with getting forward to the demo. I'll just ask this while you're preparing that. So a couple of questions that have been brought up about some about MQTT, also about JMS, for example. So while you're doing the demo specifically, I know it's about Kafka this specific time. It may be worthwhile talking through how you might do stuff if you were using MQTT and just show people how easy it is to be able to switch between different protocols and specifications and things like that, and how that would work in practical terms. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my browser now?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Looking forward to seeing this.
Okay, cool. So let's go. So there are 2 main components which I can show you from my web browser. So first is the Gravitee console. So for those who are not yet aware, we bring a new version of the UI and the new menu since the 3.19 or 3.20. I'm not too sure. I think that's 3.22 as far as I remember. So we have the menu for the 3.20. And so what I've done here is just to create an API, which is called a fraud detection async API. So that's very classical API from a Gravitee perspective. And so what I can do here is just to define some standard attributes, or say properties from my API. But the most interesting here is about the documentation. So you know that you can already create different type of pages, whatever it's an open API, a markdown, maybe an ASCII doc, and you can also create the async API specification page from the Gravitee portal. So that's quite classical, I would say. What you have to do is probably to write inline your API specification, or you can associate, or you can bind it to any kind of external source, such as a Git repository, a Bitbucket, maybe GitHub, maybe a web page where we can retrieve that one. And so we can let Gravitee to extract or to import the page directly into the Gravitee management API. And so then from a portal perspective, so I branded that portal just for the webinar. So we have only a single API right now. And you can see that we have we have our fraud detection async API, which I would choose for. And then from the documentation, we have the async API specification, which is available to your consumers so they know how to consume your API through Gravitee. So obviously there are the support for the different bindings, the different channels, the subscribers, the publishers, etc., etc. But that's the kind of things you can do from Gravitee. And so for who wants to go a bit more deeper, I think that's still great to show you the designer, because that's something we'll do by using the Postman collection right after the call, right after that part. But basically, what you can do is to associate some policies to the flows. So depending on the kind of path the request done by your consumers, you can associate one or multiple policies when the gateway is processing the request, the response, or the messages. So all this is quite standard with Gravitee. But now,
David, one quick question that's come up that I thought might be interested to just address while you're showing the portal to people is about the consumer onboarding experience and that subscribe, the button subscribe in the top right-hand corner. You don't need to necessarily click it, but maybe just explain how you can have one unified subscription experience for sync versus async and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump back onto the portal. So basically, when you're defining an API with Gravitee, sorry, button up. So when you're defining an API within Gravitee, you have to define what we are calling a plan. So you can have multiple plans for a single API. And let's say that the plans would be the kind of contract between the consumer and you as an API publisher exposing or publishing your API to the gateway. Okay, so meaning that you need absolutely a plan for being able to call or to invoke an API to the gateway. And the plan will be used for making the association between who wants to consume the service and what he wants to consume in which condition. Do we want to apply some kind of rate limitation or quota or that kind of things that will be driven by the plan. So here, in that case, for my fraud detection API, I created a free plan, which is limited, but a free plan still. And from a portal perspective, whatever it's a sync or async API, that remains the same flow, the same workflow from a subscription perspective. So basically, what you can see here is that we have this subscribe button on the top right of the window. And if I click on that one, I'm not sure how far I will be able to go because I have no application at that stage. But basically, you will retrieve the list of the different plans, and then as a subscriber, you could choose for the one you are interested in. So you will have a wizard getting you through the different steps of the subscription, asking for which application to use and for subscribing to the plan, and maybe other things if you need some security aspects, such as the OAuth client ID, maybe things that like that. But basically, the flows and the workflow for subscribing to an API remains the same, whatever it's a sync or an async API. And I think that's a great thing with Gravitee. Now, what I would like to show you is how finally to create those async API and how we can make them to interact with different backends. For the purpose of a demo, I will just use Kafka because I don't want to switch to different things. So let's jump on Postman. So what I've said previously and all the things which you can see from the console or the portal are all based on what we are calling a management API. So basically, what you can do from the UI is equally the same as the actions as you can do from the management API or from the Gravitee Kubernetes operator. In that case, what I will show you is from a Postman. I've prepared already different API definition, which we will go through, and we'll push them to the management API and we'll make some calls to the gateway so that I can show you how we can apply some patterns such as data ingestion on top of Kafka, or we can consume events, etc., etc. So first use case is about the data ingestion. So here you can see a very standard API definition at Gravitee. The only difference with the previous one is obviously the version of the definition and other things such as how you want the gateway to listen for something. What will be the technology? What will be the way to consume the gateway to make sure that we are applying that particular API to a given call. So in our case, that's pure data ingestion where we're looking at posting data into a Kafka broker. So in that case, I've defined a path. So I'm just telling the gateway that it could be a path, it could be a virtual host with some host, etc. But for the purpose of the demo, that will be just a path. And so we are telling the gateway, when I invoke you on the /data/ingestion/Kafka path, you have to listen for HTTP post kind of entry point. So the gateway will react to a post request to the gateway. And at the bottom, you can see that we have defined endpoints. So basically endpoints are the backend services. So that's where the gateway will forward the calls, or that's where the gateway will establish a kind of long connection with the underlying messaging technologies. In that case, again, we are relying on Kafka. I've just installed a Kafka using Docker. So I'm pointing on Kafka 1992, which is a local instance of Docker. And for that specific purpose, I just had to define the topics, which is a static value. Obviously, you can rely on the famous Gravitee expression language if you wanted to make that one dynamic based on the incoming request, based on some HTTP headers, based on whatever. This value can be dynamic. So all I have to do is to create the API. I have to create a keyless plan. So there is a keyless plan. So that's basically a plan without kind of security. We have to publish the plan. Sorry. So let me show basically here from the URL, you can see that we're looking at publishing the plan. And we have to tell the gateway that we want to publish that one and to start the API on the gateway. That's all. Now, what I will do is to jump back on Chrome, and I'm using a tool called AKHQ, which is there just for me to manage my Kafka broker. So you remember that we were looking at relying on the demo topic. I wanted to make sure that right now there is no message as per that topic. Okay, you can see count equals to 0. So there is no message. So what I would like to do now is to post a message to that one. So I will just apply a curl, and so I will post something to the /data/ingestion/Kafka. I hope that's not too small. That's okay for you, Rory, Nicolas? All good?
It's fairly small, but my eyesight is also going. So yeah, that's probably a bit better.
Yeah, let me zoom in. Okay, all good. So let me restart so it's clear. So what I'm doing here is very classical curl command where I'm posting a content, that's a body content, a pure JSON one, to my gateway. So that's my local gateway listening on the /data/ingestion/Kafka path, which we described from the API definition. So I will just post that one, and I'm receiving 200 OK status code from my gateway telling me, or I hope, that the message has been pushed to Kafka. So that's something we'll check right now. And so if I refresh my console, the AKHQ console, you can see that now we have a demo topic, which has been created dynamically in that case, and we have one message for now. So that's cool. We covered the data ingestion thing. Now we see how we can consume the data from the Kafka broker. So that's the second use case, basically. So for that one, we'll start with some event consumption over, let's say, WebSocket to start with. So I created another API. Obviously, it could be the same API as the one we used for the data ingestion, but I split the things for keeping things as simple as possible for you guys to understand. So another API, more or less the same thing. I've defined a path, so that's where the gateway will listen for, /demo/WS for WebSockets. I would like you to listen using a WebSocket, kind of entry points. That's all. And the rest remains the same. Basically, we are relying on the same Kafka broker. We are looking at relying on the same topic. So nothing crazy at that stage. Same thing, same workflow. I create the API, I create the plan associated to associate to the API. I publish the plan and I start the API. So now let's see in practice. So you know that we have sent one message to the Kafka broker. So I will use not curl in that case, but I will use a WebSocket command, and I will plug that one to, again, my local gateway listening on the /demo/WS. That's done. And now you can see that we just received a message because obviously we already pushed a message to the Kafka. So because I'm part of a new consumer group, in that case, from a Kafka perspective, I'm receiving the message which has been already sent into Kafka. So now what we can do is to post another message, and you will see that from the right terminal, we will react directly and we will receive the message from Kafka. So basically, we post from Gravitee, we push into Kafka, and we have a consumers who established a long connection using WebSocket to the gateway, and the gateway is doing the protocol mediation with the Kafka broker, and so we are receiving the message directly. That was the second use case. Let's cover very quickly the third one, which is about the server sent event. Same way, exactly the same things. Things are really simple. Path /demo/SSE. We are telling the gateway that the entry point will be now a server sent event kind of entry point. And again, the endpoints remain the same. So we are looking at relying on the same Kafka broker with the same topic, nothing fancy. And now what I will do is to reuse the famous curl. I'm just enabling the event stream thing from a curl perspective. And I'm looking at posting that one to the /demo/SSE. Let's go. You know that now we pushed two different messages, and here we are. We just received two different messages. Obviously, the WebSockets and the SSE are two different consumers, okay? Which means that now, if I'm posting a message to my broker, I should have two different messages from my WebSocket and from my event stream curl command. So let's try. And here we are again. We are receiving two messages from both the WebSocket and the service sent event. Okay, cool. So in that case, that was great, but it was at the initiative of the consumer to establish the connection to the gateway, and we will let the gateway to stream the messages to the consumers, whatever it's a WebSocket and SEC. What we are looking at doing now is to reverse the responsibilities. And now I will tell the gateway, okay, look, now if you're getting something from me, from a specific Kafka topic, I would like you to push that one to a webhook URL, which I'm exposing. So I no longer have to retain or to maintain a long connection to the gateway. It will be up to the gateway to post the message somewhere. So let's go. Again, Postman. And let me find the right one. So we'll go for the webhook one. So as usual, we are creating an API. The only things which will change here is that we'll say to the gateway, okay, now my entry point is a webhook, okay? That's the only difference. The rest, again, as the other use cases, the endpoints remain the same broker, the same topic, nothing crazy. What we have to do now is to create what we are calling a subscription. So you remember that for consuming an API, we always need a plan. For the webhook, we have a specific type of plan, which is called a subscription plan, to which the consumer will have to subscribe to, but they will have to provide much more information. I say much more, at least one information. And what's the information needed when you're subscribing to a webhook API? That's pretty simple. That's where the gateway have to make the call. So we make sure that we are calling that endpoint for posting the data. So when I'm subscribing to an API, instead of providing, I don't know, my client ID or maybe a few other things, I just have to say, okay, look, gateway, I want to subscribe to the subscription plan, and you need to push the data and you need to push the messages to that callback here. Okay, there are other options such as you can specify some default headers. These could be static, this could be dynamic as well. That's really up to you. But just for the scope of the demo, we are interested in the callback URL. So for that case, I'm relying on something called webhook.site, and I'm using a particular UID to receive the messages. So I will just remove the previous one. So I've opened the webhook URL, which I've configured while subscribing to an API. Okay. So what I'm expecting now is when I'm posting a message, I'm receiving things from the WebSocket and the SSE connection, but obviously I'm receiving also the same message from my webhook. So basically it was for the gateway to post the message with different information, with the headers which we configure as part of the subscription. And here we are. We just made very quickly, we just create very quickly a webhook, let's say, connection to react to events or messaging coming to your Kafka broker. That's good, but I want more. I want more. I want to apply some policies to my flows. I want to apply some policies to my messages. So maybe the messages, or let's say the events which you're receiving from your Kafka broker are not the one which you would expect, because you need a particular format. You need a single way to define the messages, to define the format of your messages. So what I've prepared here is another example where we are saying, okay, that's good. We are receiving message from a webhook, but now I want to apply policies to my webhook. Okay, so the first part will remain the same as the previous example. We have a webhook subscription. We are relying still on Kafka on my local instance, but more is coming. In that case, I'm telling the gateway, okay, when you have a subscription, when you have something coming into the subscription flow from a gateway perspective, I want you to apply a given policy. In that case, I want to apply what is called the cloud events, which is a kind of new specification for representing your different events from your information system. So you have a unique way to define or to represent or to format your messages across your information system. So we are looking at providing that kind of policy, called the cloud events policies. And I've just configured that one to look at some metadata or attributes from the incoming message. As I know that the message is coming from Kafka, I wanted to rely on some metadata which are specific to Kafka. So in that case, I needed to extract the information about the offset, the topic, the partition. You have others, but that's the basic one I wanted to rely on for the purpose of this webinar. So let's have a try. So basically, again, we are creating an API. We added the cloud events policy when we are receiving things from Kafka. I created a new application with a subscription. So I'm making sure that I'm posting message to another webhook. And so we can compare what we received previously and what we are receiving now. So we have nothing. Let's send a message. We still have our WebSocket and SSE reacting to what's coming. No change, nothing crazy. We are still receiving, as part of the previous webhook subscription, the standard body content payload, which we send from the data ingestion. But if you're looking at the other webhook subscription, you can see now that the message has been, let's say, formatted, has been translated into a standard cloud events format. So we are receiving few different things. The source, it's a Kafka coming from a demo topic, from the partition 0 with the offset 0. We choose to call it the webinar events, and we are retrieving the different data from what we posted from a data ingestion perspective. Cool, crazy. Now, maybe you are receiving too many messages from your Kafka topic, and maybe you're not necessarily interested by all of them. And so as a subscriber, you would want to apply some kind of filtering to the message, so you make sure that you are only receiving the one you are interested in. Again, that's something you can do with Gravitee. So let's jump again onto the Postman collection. We'll create a new another API, still using a web subscription, still using the same Kafka local instance, but at the end, instead of applying the cloud events policy, in that case, I'm just telling that we want to apply a message filtering policy, so we can filter the messages coming from Kafka, which are then pushed to your callback URL, your webhook URL. In that case, the filter is a quite simple one. I mean, yeah, that's still simple for me, not always, but so basically from that size, the rule is when you're receiving the payload, when you're receiving the content of the message, I would like you to ensure that when the parameter attribute from my JSON payload is equals to something I've configured as part of the subscription, so I want to receive the message. If that's not equals, I want you to just filter the message because I'm not interested in that one anymore from my webhook. What I've done then is to create two different subscriptions. One is pointing to another webhook site with different headers, and you can see that we have added some method with a specific parameter, which is called demo, okay? And I created another one, which is more or less exactly the same, another target URL, but with a parameter which is called webinar. Okay, good. So if you remember now, if I jump back on the create API, just remember that if a parameter attribute from the JSON payload, which is corresponding to the one I configured while subscribing to an API, I should receive the message. Okay, so let's have a try. We already received plenty of them, so I will just make sure that we are cleaning them. So we have two webhooks. Okay, one is interested on the message which are containing the demos value as per the parameter, and the other one is interested in the webinar parameter. So let's have a try. In that case, we have someone looking for a demo parameter, let's say async for now. So everyone is receiving it. The first one is not receiving the message. The second one is not receiving the message because no one is looking for the async parameter. Let's jump and switch to the demo value. Now we are still receiving all the messages from the WebSockets and the SSC connection. And here we have the first one, which was interested in the demo parameter, who received the message. And again, the second one who didn't receive anything because that guy is looking only for the webinar parameter. So let's switch to the webinar so we can show that we are doing the right thing. Webinar, and here we go. We are receiving the webinar for that specific webhook, and the other one received nothing. And the other webhook are still receiving message, okay? So basically, you can see that the one on which we applied the cloud events policy are still receiving the different messages. The first one, which was with the async parameter, the second one with the demo parameter, and the last one with the webinar parameter. Same here, but without using the cloud events. So that's all from a demo perspective. I think that was quite complex, maybe a bit complex to follow sometimes. But if you have any questions, just feel free to ask, and it will be our pleasure to have another round to explain things more deeper.
Awesome. That's amazing, David. Thank you so much. And hopefully that was really insightful for a lot of people. David, if you wouldn't mind just going, one slide down and just going into presentation mode again. Just for everyone's benefit, again, this is the way you can go. If anything that's been of interest to you from what David said, or anything that Nicola or myself have spoken to you about, you're more than welcome to go to this page, landing.gravitee.io/consultation, and we can take you through and do a tailored demonstration. We could do a very sort of deep dive into your architecture, anything that really will help you in terms of your sync and async events, all this sort of stuff, anything that can help you in that regard. We're more than happy to do that, and we'd love to work with you and engage with you on it. So before we go any further, right, hopefully you should have that pop up at the screen again, I think, if I'm right in saying, Georgie. What we want to be able to do at this particular point, we're going to move to questions. And I think I'll quickly start with one question, David, because there was a couple of questions that we saw come up and that would help me as well, is when you were doing the demo, which was awesome, if, for example, rather than using Kafka as a backend service, I was using an MQTT queue, for example, how would I go about doing that within Gravitee?
Yeah, so basically, we are stick to Kafka. So basically, what you will have to do from a Gravitee perspective is to create different backends. So basically, instead of having just one endpoint pointing to a Kafka broker, you could have different group of endpoints, one which could be based on the Kafka broker and another one which could be based on your MQTT broker. And then, as per the definition of the flows within Gravitee, you could say to the gateway, if you are calling me on that particular path, so I want you to forward the messages to my Kafka broker, and because you are containing a specific header or specific terms within the payload, I want you to forward things to an MQTT broker. So that's not like you have to define multiple API because you have different technologies and different messaging technologies. You can do everything from a single API and maintains your rules or your routing rules within the same API definition.
Very cool, very cool. Hopefully that's clear to some people. One thing that was asked actually, David, that would be useful is some people were asking a bit more about sort of east-west versus north-south and stuff like that. Not necessarily in the context of this demo. I was wondering if you might be able to give them a sort of 20-30 second overview of the sort of capabilities in terms of the Kubernetes operators, all this sort of stuff, in terms of the capabilities in Gravitee from east-west versus north-south.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we can deploy the gateway. So that's not like you have to deploy a central gateway to manage all the incoming calls from a north-south architecture perspective. You could have still a gateway on top or in front of your different microservices. These are currently managed by the Gravitee control plane. So that's the management API plus the console, etc. What we are looking at introducing with also the Gravitee Cube operator is another way for you to define and to describe your APIs without having to rely on the Gravitee console, the UI, etc. So you can define them from your Cube cluster, and these will be pushed directly to the gateway. So the gateway can react to the API definition and forward the calls to the microservices. And then in the next months and the next release of Gravitee, we're looking at introducing that what we are calling the DB-less and /headless mode of the gateway. So you don't have anymore to rely on the control plane for defining your APIs, and so you can manage them in a stateless way, I would say, and again, completely decorrelated from a database or ways to manage metrics, analytics, etc., etc., etc.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. So we'll hand over now. If you just go back onto the presentation, David, and just onto the questions page, we'll hand over to Georgie, who I think has been taking all the different questions from the sort of little chat that we had in the session here. And she's going to fire some questions at I think the three of us, and whoever gets there first on the buzzer can take the question, or you're maybe going to name us, name and shame.
Exactly. I may actually do some naming and shaming.
Very
And
good.
apologies for anybody who has sent through a question, and we may not have time to get through it today, but we make sure they are all answered, of course. So the first question, and I've put this one for you, Rory. So we've been using streaming technology, so Kafka internally, and we've been writing custom Python scripts to access topics, but we're now looking at making these available externally. We have a ton of security concerns. We're seeing that a lot recently. Can you talk a little about how you can manage security, because there is a lot of reluctance to expose our topics externally, as you can imagine?
Yeah, interesting. Actually, I've had a lot of conversations, very similar conversations with companies recently exactly on this topic. So really, if I go back to some of the early slides that I did in this presentation, the key things were, if you cast your mind back to the very first sort of REST APIs and stuff like this, it was back to that sort of buy versus build mentality of, I've got a REST API, I'm going to put a simple layer in front of it that does something. But the problem is that to maintain the standards, to maintain the security and all those sorts of things, and to provide what the API management platforms do provide, which is that consistency of security, the consistency of what David just showed in terms of traffic shaping, in terms of transformation, in terms of conformity to different standards, to different data models and things like this. That's what Gravitee fundamentally provides now in relation to not only your REST API services, because maybe that wasn't clear in some of the bits that we spoke about earlier. Everything that we can do within Gravitee is like REST API is a complete standard within the platform, but you also have the ability to be able to apply those sorts of standards that one would be familiar with in a REST world to your asynchronous world. And that's really comes to the heart of your question, I would say, Georgie, is that not necessarily your question, but whoever asked the question, that the key point is that I get that nervousness. I was speaking to a customer a couple of days ago who was saying, look, we have a use case where we need to expose these sort of real-time events to people outside of our organization, but there's a genuine fear in terms of, I've just got a note saying that my video connection is unstable, so hopefully you can still hear me. But
yeah, you're fine.
Okay, good. There's a genuine fear that they may accidentally expose a streaming service externally, because there isn't the same sort of concepts that you had that have been developed in the REST world for API lifecycle management and security and governance and all these different things. That doesn't exist in the event world at this particular point in time. And that's exactly what Gravitee is providing. Think about exactly what that wheel that you've invented, this whole figure of eight thing about the full lifecycle API management, and applying that to your events. And that's what Gravitee provides. And that's really what I can say in relation to that. There are solutions to be able to deal with it. And that's exactly what we're trying to provide to companies.
Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. So this one, this time I think it's probably best to go to David. So just to make sure I understood correctly, what if we have MQTT and Kafka? Can we use Gravitee to wrap both of those with REST APIs, or can you only do one of them?
I would say same response as the previous one. So yeah, no issue. You can link or associate both Kafka and MQTT to one or multiple APIs, and to make some protocol mediation at the gateway level with Gravitee.
Awesome. The next one I have put here for Rory, but obviously feel free to chip in where you kind of all feel necessary. So can you please elaborate on how we can provide a self-service subscription to APIs that our end consumers or customers can pay for? I heard you talking about plans, but wasn't sure if that was the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's certainly part of the journey, the plan. So David obviously demonstrated this, the little button in the top right-hand corner on the portal that said subscribe, right? And that's the sort of start of the journey. So your consistent discoverability and your consistent mechanism for your consumers, your end consumers, to be able to get access to different data services, whether the underlying service is streaming, or whether it's a REST service, or whatever it may be. Fundamentally, the key thing, one of the key differentiators that Gravitee has, is that it has one consistent way that your consumers can can subscribe to it. And that's particularly valuable in this concept that Georgie's speaking about here in relation to commercialization of your data services, because that one consistent approach means that all the analytics that sit beneath your monetization of services, so things like number of API calls, or that doesn't really work in an event native world, right? Think about the amount of data maybe that's being transmitted. Think about all these different mechanisms. What Gravitee provides now is one consistent place where you can get the same analytics and all that sort of stuff to provide that commercialization of your data services. And just for everyone's benefit, I was looking at some of the initial results that were coming on the poll side. It was really interesting actually to see that with still a fairly nascent, it's not nascent technology, but nascent theme, I would say, within the technology sphere of this event-driven architecture and stuff like that, we are seeing a lot of companies that are actually adopting commercial approaches, so monetizing their actual data streams outside of it. So I thought I would share that with you as well, because I was just glancing over at that at the same time. But yeah, the fundamental capability is that consistent approach to being able to expose and then consume, and then also look at the analytics associated with your different data services that then enables you as a business to appropriately commercialize it in a way that's relevant for your business, basically.
Amazing, thank you. And then the last question that I've got written down here, there are more coming in. I can see them kind of popping up in my chat, but maybe I can go back to them in just a second. This one is one of my favorites, actually. So this question is, we have both sync and async APIs. It's challenging to monitor all this from a logging perspective. Does Gravitee offer logging across both sync and async?
David, do you go for it, or Nicola?
Up to you guys.
Yeah, you go for it, mate. Go for it. Take
it. Cool. Okay, so from a monitoring perspective, we are covering both aspects. So for those who are already aware of what Gravitee is providing as per the way we are managing the analytics and all the metrics around your sync APIs, we are looking at providing exactly the same sort of capabilities for your async API. So you'll be able to follow exactly the number of calls which are done, or the number of messages going through the long connections between the gateway and your broker, whatever the kind of technology. So yeah, that's the kind of things which we are looking at doing. That's ongoing stuff which will be released for the next version of Gravitee, and that's all the things which will be needed to apply the monetization pattern on top of the metrics which we are getting from the Gravitee gateway platform.
Very cool.
Awesome. We've just had, there are quite a few more questions as well. I really don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them. So I've just picked another one, which is simply asking, what about Keycloak integration?
Yeah, interesting. Nicola, do you want to take that one? Can you hear me, Nicola? Are you still alive?
Yes. Yeah. I have some disconnection. I have not a stable connection. Sorry. So I've not heard. Okay. I've heard the question about Keycloak, but not your question. Sorry. Can you say it again?
My question was, do you want to take the question on Keycloak?
Yeah, sure. So the Keycloak integration, it's not really rely on the async stuff. It's a classic. It's a classic integration with the O2 servers that we already have in your API with an external resource for the O2 and OIDC connection and validation. And we have in the roadmap, I don't remember when, sorry, perhaps more for David to introduce the concept of platform resources. So we'll be able to define your resource at only one level, and it will be available for all your APIs, at the opposite of how you, for those who are familiar with Gravitee's concept right now, where you have to put some stuff in different APIs. So this is in the roadmap, but in terms of, we are already compatible with Keycloak.
Cool. David, did you want to just respond to Nicola's point there in terms of the platform resources, I think it was?
Yeah, so that's basically a way for people to define resource at the environment level instead of defining them at the API level. So these can be shared across the APIs part of the same environment. So that's from a console and management API perspective, but that's already something which we are supporting thanks to the Gravitee Cube operator. So basically, you can describe your resource, your Gravitee resource, using a classical Kubernetes custom resource definition. And so it can be reused across the different APIs which you're defining within your Kubernetes cluster. So that's already something you can do today with the GKO, and you'll have to wait a bit for the introduction into the environment as part of the next version, again, of Gravitee.
Very cool. Nice one. Georgie, back to you.
Amazing. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to all of our attendees that have stayed here for quite a long time actually today. I know there were some questions left at the end, and I do apologize that we couldn't answer them. We will come back to them in an email that we'll send out tomorrow with, of course, the recording of this webinar. Just one more reminder, of course, if you do want to book a consultation with us, please just click on the call to action. I will add it to the email as well. And just to remind you again, it is free, and you don't have to do it. It's there for you if you need it. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with everyone. Thank you, Georgie, for sorting everything. David and Nicola for always being the brains of the operation. And yeah, thank you all. It's lovely to speak to you all. Thank you for the questions. They were amazing, and looking forward to speaking with you and helping you on your sync and async journeys as we continue to expand in the world.